Friends, welcome. We are live, and this is a relatively new segment on the channel called Knowledge Report. And as you can see below, we will be covering the news that the controlled opposition won't touch with a fucking 10-foot pole. And this is some new software that I'm using, by the way, guys. So check this out. I can throw in the chat so I don't have to, well, fuck, I can't figure that out. I'm just using this new software called Restream. So if I mess it up or I don't quite know how to use it or it's a little fumbly today, I'll definitely be getting used to it. But this is going to clear away a lot of things so you guys can see the chat, etc. Got a little bit of music in the background. Okay, so with that out of the way, do I even know how to remove the messages? Like I said, bear with me. How freaking cool is that, by the way? Okay, so what we're covering today, let me show you the channel because we have a lot of new people coming in, and I want to bring everybody up to speed on kind of what the heck we're doing over here. So let me share this. Again, bear with me, folks. It's brand new trying this shit. Okay. So here we go. If you go to the home page over here, this is the channel. And if you scroll down, these are the latest uploads right here in the first section. If you want to know who the hell I am and what my Scientology experience is, there's 2 seasons so far of the Raised in a Secret Society series, third one coming soon. SPTV Live, where we have people on that are, well, I don't know if this guy's in Scientology, but everybody else is. And if you haven't checked out Chris Malin's interview, by the way, you have to check that out, as well as many, many other interesting people from the SPTV crew. Now, Knowledge Report, that's where this fits in. We have Over the Rainbow movie. More will be explained in part 2 of this video called Divided Loyalties, Exploring Scientology's Controlled Opposition. And that's where this video fits in. In other words, we're going to be covering information that a lot of the community, you know, there's like, what, 12 people from Int Base, you know, that we see over and over again on the Aftermath. And it's sort of like the same dozen people. And there are certain subjects that are kind of off limits. So that's what this is about. That's in this new section. I interview a narcissistic psychopath in this series called Interview with the Narcissist. And his name is H.G. Tudor. And he breaks down the very important subject of narcissism. And there's like 12 or 13 videos in that. And then we're doing another one next month. This one sucks, man. I miss Marcus. Hopefully we can get back to doing the Breaking Down the Bridge series, which is awesome. And that is Backflash Fridays. And then we have podcast Cult Con Conspiracies, got some interviews, some cult clips. These cult clips are not necessarily just taken from videos. They're separate videos unto themselves. People coming out of Scientology, I'd highly recommend to check this one out, the 10 Steps Out of Scientology or any cult, and then there's guest appearances. So that can all be found on the homepage. Okay, so with that out of the way, what the hell are we talking about today? I need to give you a little bit of a history as to how, see you guys, I don't even know how the hell this thing works. I think I'll pull this off just for a second so we can get some actual human being on here. So one of the things that is sort of an off-limit topic is the mysterious suicides and deaths that have happened all throughout Scientology's career. Dianetics was formed in 1950. In April of 1953, it became Scientology. And literally from then on, this has been a recurring theme. Now, up until the summer of 2019, this was allowed to be talked about. And everybody knew about what we're talking about right now. Which is the death of Flo Barnett, which is Shelly Miscavige's mother. That's the history we're going to be covering, but I just wanted to give a little bit of background where up until the summer of 2009, all of the critics and all of the ex-Scientologists would often gather on a message board called ESBM, Ex-Scientology Message Board, where topics like we're going to discuss today were openly allowed to be discussed. When Mark Rathbun came onto the scene in the summer of 2009, not only did this become an off-topic area slowly, it was sort of immediately handled so that to distract, to go on to other subjects, let's not talk about the deaths, let's just talk about getting the tax-exempt status removed, the financial crimes, etc. All of which is important, by the way. But Marty had a hand, let's say, and you'll see why in this video, in sort of making sure that a lot of people in the X community sort of dash around these subjects. Hence, Knowledge Report, where we're going to be covering not just this stuff, but very interesting topics that have sort of been off the radar or not discussed. For example, next week we'll be talking about Aldous Huxley's involvement in Scientology and how deep that goes, and subjects sort of like that you haven't heard before. So with that background, I'm going to start. So you have the timeline of this was not an off talk. We were allowed to basically talk about this. 2009 in the summer, Marty rolls on. Now it becomes less about ex-Scientology message board and more about YouTube and the internet. Project Handle the Internet. So as everything is shifted over, we still have the same kind of problems, but maybe on an even bigger scale. So with that background, I'm going to start in 2012, where we're going to be, I need to say something about this too. We're going to be starting out with an article from Tony Ortega. And in the Controlled Opposition video, part 2, we'll talk about Tony and all these people, okay? What I'm looking for is information. Almost everybody, myself included, in the ex-Scientology community has something in their background that can discredit them. Any human being alive has, nobody's perfect. So what I'm saying is, while I know of Tony's background, and Nora and Aaron have been exposing him, which is what they're saying is correct, and there's more to go on that, it doesn't mean to me that all the reporting he and other people have done is irrelevant or not important. So I just wanted to put that caveat in there, because in order to start this story, let's pretend you know nothing about this. He has a really good article that would introduce us to this that's accurate. But like I said, I don't hold a lot of, I've had my own interactions with Tony. That's another video for another time. So let's start with this. This is about a 10-minute read, and then we're going to cover some videos, the autopsy report, and we're going to go deeper into what the hell is going on and how there's no way in hell this was a suicide, despite what the Controlled Opposition says it is. Okay, so here we go. This is 2012. Now we're just getting into the point where the internet kind of needs to be handled. Again, summer 2009, Marty kind of comes onto the scene. He's given Karen de la Carriere's American Express card to fund the indie movement, and now it's kind of Operation Handle the Internet. Same game, but now it's moving over here. So this is 2012-ish to give you a timeline on what we're talking about. So sit back and relax. This will give you a really good foundation going forward on what we're going to be talking about. And this is Tony Ortega talking here when he was at the Village Voice. Again, more to say about that in future videos. A Ruger 10-22 rifle. Even if you were depressed and wanted to end your life, could you shoot yourself 3 times in the chest and then once in the head with this weapon? We're talking about a rifle. Flo Barnett apparently committed suicide by shooting herself with a long rifle. Excuse me. 3 times in the chest and 1 time in the head. The head was the death shot. We were stunned when Deborah Kitching said it. In the 26 years since she investigated the odd death of Mary Florence Flo Barnett, again, Shelly Miscavige's mother, for the Los Angeles County Coroner, she has not once been asked by a reporter about what she remembers of the case. Only once in that time, she says, was she ever asked about it at all. Quote, I think her daughter or a relative sent a letter, an inquiry, I think, Kitching said. Today, Kitchings is retired and lives in Riverside County, California. But in 1985, she was an investigator with the LA Department of Coroner when, on the night of September 8th, she was called to Dominguez Valley Hospital in Compton to conduct a gunshot residue test on the hands of the dead woman. Despite the passage of time, Kitchings remembers the case well, and she suspects that there's a reason that I'm interested in this one death out of the many she's handled over her career. It has something to do with Scientology, right? She said. Tony says, indeed it does. Over the years, interest in the death of Flo Barnett has endured because of her connection to the Church of Scientology. Remember, this is 2012, and how much have we heard about this since then? I only found one video the other night, which I'm going to show you a clip from, on the internet, on YouTube, with Claire Headley and Hana Whitfield talking briefly about this, but again, kind of dodging around the subject. Indeed, it does. Over the years, interest in the death of Flo Barnett has endured because of her connection to the Church of Scientology. Barnett's daughter, Shelly Barnett, Shelly Miscavige obviously used to be named Shelly Barnett. In 1981, married David Miscavige, who today is the supreme ruler of the worldwide religion. Flo was Miscavige's mother-in-law, and Shelly herself has not been seen in public with her husband since 2006. Now remember, this is 2012, so this is a little more updated information about that saga. But that's a story we'll be going into another day. There is another reason why Flo Barnett's death is still a matter of interest on the internet, I told Kitchings. Again, we're at internet times. Quite a few of us, I explained to her, wonder how Barnett managed to shoot herself 3 times in the chest and once in the head with a long rifle, and what the medical examiner ruled was a suicide. Now, real briefly, let's just pause here a minute and think about this. What they're saying, oh man, my bad. What's being suggested here is that there's a long rifle that Flo Barnett in 1985, while wanting to commit suicide, has down here. She shoots just to bend down and try to hit the firing on the rifle. I'm no expert, but I'm not even sure that would be possible. But this is the scenario that's being suggested. Let's assume you got the rifle down here, you're sitting on your bed, and you once pull the trigger right in the chest. So that's shot 1. Now, you go, wow, that didn't work. Let me try another shot. So she bends down, fires another one into the chest. Can you imagine what that would already do? So, wow, that didn't work. They're saying she must have said in her head, fires another one right in the chest, and then that didn't work. And then on the right side of the head, she bends down, fires the rifle, and that's the death shot right there. That's what we're supposed to believe was her suicide attempt. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. All right, so let me get the right screen here. All right, continuing on. It is very unusual, Kitchings told me Monday night when we talked over the telephone. We spent some time going over her report of the incident, a document that can be found online. I'm going to show you the coroner report towards the end. And by the way, I know I sound like a broken record. All the videos, this reference, everything else, a few hours after the video publishes, all the references are in all the description box of all the videos. I highly encourage you to do your own research and dig deeper into it. She wanted to confirm the facts in her report with what she remembered, that she didn't respond to the scene of the incident, but was called by sheriff's office personnel to the hospital where Barnett had already been pronounced dead. Kitchings wanted me to understand why that made a difference. Normally, if death is pronounced at the hospital, it's not a pressing case, and student workers in the coroner's office would go down in the next couple of days to retrieve the body. Instead, in this case, there's always something with Scientology mysterious deaths. Instead, in this case, Kitchings was personally called down to the hospital the same night Barnett's body was taken there. Quote, the detective must have had some concern. We respond because they have a question. That concern was pretty obvious and something Kitchings put in her report that night. Quote, detectives felt at the time of this report, the decedent, that means the dead, may be the victim of a homicide due to the number of times she was shot. Gee, really? However, they were still interviewing at the time of this report. After performing an autopsy, however, medical examiner Joan Shipley decided that Barnett's death was a suicide. Quote, the case is that of a 52-year-old woman. Remember, she's 52 years old that supposedly performed that miraculous feat that I tried to just act out there. Quote, the case is that of a 52-year-old woman who died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds which were self-inflicted, reads Shipley's report, which came out more than a month after the incident. I asked Keatings how an autopsy determined that cause. I'll tell you how. It doesn't mean it was a suicide, but I'll tell you how they came to that conclusion, Kitchings answered. It's real easy to get away with murder anyways. It's only as good as the investigator. That's very telling because in the Lisa McPherson case, for example, it was just getting to the coroner, the investigator, and the surrounding people. It's not trying to prove that there was any negligent death. It's simply getting to the people that can change the decision. And we have ample evidence, and we know all about how Scientology safe points people, how they infiltrate the LAPD, for example, and can get to almost anybody. She explained that a medical examiner like Shipley could describe wounds and other conditions of a corpse, but she couldn't tell by looking how a wound came to happen. She gave me a hypothetical example of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Quote, a doctor has no clue whether the man shot his head off, which is a suicide, or died playing Russian roulette, which is an accident, or if somebody shot him, which is a homicide. The doctor cannot tell you whether it was accidental or on purpose. They have to rely on the investigator. So it depends on several things. She pointed out that there was no question that what killed Barnett was the shot to the head. Again, that was supposedly the fatal shot. The gunshot wound to the head was immediately fatal and occurred following the 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, reads the autopsy report. But the detective would also perform what Kitchings called a psychological autopsy, meaning interviewing people at the scene, such as Barnett's husband. He was the main suspect at first. James Miller, who found his wife's body and was initially treated as a possible suspect. Okay, so there's two possibles. Oh yeah, there you go. Just one possible suspect, and they didn't look into anybody else, which is unusual too. Here's what you've got, what appears to be a homicide, but you run into these other factors, she said. The hesitation marks on the wrist, for example, were they fresh or were they healing? Now, Flo was suicidal. She was an OT7. We'll talk about that later, about why I think that's important. She was losing her mind. She needed help. And apparently she was trying to commit suicide by cutting her wrist, but only slightly. They weren't very deep wounds. In other words, it seemed like she was contemplating it. But again, more to say on that as we go. That was another odd detail in the case. Barnett not only had 4 bullet wounds, her wrist also showed evidence that they had been slashed. According to the coroner, Barnett's wrist had likely been sliced days before. The wounds are consistent with those of several days' age, but are extremely superficial and may be more acute, the autopsy report reads, suggesting a possible suicide attempt a few days prior to Barnett's actual death. On the other hand, Kitching said there were multiple gunshots. Of course, it's unusual to have that many gunshots, and with a rifle, totally bizarre. But if you think this case is bad, you should hear about this other one, Crystal Spencer, and then Kitchings goes on to explain that. It's very unusual, and the sheriff's detectives thought it was important. Really? She said, referring again to her, of course it's important. She said, referring again to her being called down to the hospital that night. That's a good detective, and that tells me a lot right there. The detective was smart enough to say, come on. That doesn't take a genius, my friends, to think that that would be a homicide, and it's not too smart to question that. And believe me, that was a time when we were incredibly busy. The gang problem was never worse in those years. They're often understaffed too, so yeah, they would probably have to have X amount of qualifications to go in and dig deeper. That the coroner's office ultimately ruled it a suicide, however, said more about the detective and his investigation than it did about the actual autopsy. Again, guys, Scientology has a professional career in getting to people. I give you Lisa McPherson to change certain details and not actually confront the evidence that sits there in front of them on the autopsy table. The doctor must have been convinced that it was a suicide based on what the detective told her. The doctor has no clue and cannot tell you how or why. If we have any medical experts in here, by the way, please leave some comments and say how accurate this is. Does a doctor know? Can they tell anything, or is this accurate? And relying on a homicide detective bureau was not any kind of assurance that the correct conclusion would be reached. If it was the LAPD, I tell you it was automatically bad. Again, Scientology has long since infiltrated the LAPD and has them in their pocket in various ways. But it was the sheriff's office. And Havencroft, he was good, she says, when I tell her about the name of the detective on the reports. Quote, I didn't hear anything more in that case, so the doctor relied on the detective. If it was iffy, they would have gone with homicide. But they must have done enough interviews with the husband to convince him that it was a suicide. I wonder if Scientology interceded at all between there. It does sound very suspicious. It does sound very suspicious to me. It does, but it was out of my hands. I thank Kitchings for being so helpful and for not only telling me what she remembered of the case, but for taking the time to explain how a cause of death would be determined. It's now crystal clear. I needed to track down retired LA Sheriff's Office Detective Bob Havencroft and ask him how he came to the conclusion that a small, frail woman can kill herself with 4 rifle shots. Yesterday, I managed to get him on the phone. Having retired to Oregon, Havencroft was traveling to Southern California, enjoying the warm weather. I told him why I was calling and hoped that he remembered the Flo Barnett case out of the many cases he must have investigated. I remember that one, he said. That was very, very, very unusual. But it was a suicide. But how, I asked, could Barnett have managed to shoot herself 4 times? Very easily, Havencroft answered. We reconstructed the scene. I would love to see the reconstruction of the scene, because how do you do that? My lieutenant was there. It was fairly simple to do. The way she was positioned on her bed, the way the rifle was in her hand. I think we even recovered a bullet from next door. This was a trailer park. If she was shot, by the way, guys, it would be pretty easy to put a rifle in her hand and stage the event. It was obvious what she was doing, which was typical of some women. Oh, really? It's typical of some women to kill themselves with 4 gunshot wounds? She was trying to shoot herself in the chest and in a critical area. There was a gunshot wound to her breast, he said. Flo Barnett had breast implants, by the way, guys. When we finished the investigation, I was absolutely convinced it was a suicide. There was no question, he said, adding that he remembered a suicide note being found. In fact, 2 notes were found. Again, that Hannah Whitfield and Claire Headley video that I'm going to link in the description box, that's worth checking out because it will go into more detail about the background of her suicidal inclinations when she was on OT7, and also a recent problem that she was dealing with her body, which we'll discuss too. I have never heard another word about this case since it was investigated, and I worked another 10, 11 years after that, Havencroft said. Again, he acknowledged that the situation was extremely unusual and that on its surface, it seems to suggest a different conclusion. Hey, I can tell you my patrol deputy who was there was ready to take the husband to jail for murder. I had to cool him off. I walked him through it, he said, and explained that eventually his deputy came to the same conclusion. There's no question, he added. It's never a murder until it's a murder. We never got beyond suicide. It was easy to reconstruct with the body and the position of the gun and so on. There was no cover-up. It was a suicide. It was not a murder, he said. It was one of those very, very interesting cases. Jesus. Interesting to be sure. And one wonders why Barnett was so determined to kill herself that she endured what she did. Guys, if she really was trying to commit suicide, which it sounds like that's a possibility, and she might have actually written those notes. If this in fact happened, and this is even possible, don't you think after the first gunshot, you either might give up, pass out, or how on earth would you be able to go through, have the stamina or ability of a gal in her 50s, frail, to actually do this when she already, according to Claire Headley and Hannah Whitfield, was wanted to kind of do suicide, but couldn't pass over that line. So this would be an amazing feat of, quote, courage and impossibility if this did in fact happen. At least that's the way I see it. According to Kitching's report, Barnett's daughter Camille told her that her mother had recently had surgery for an aneurysm. Quote, although she was not in pain, she became quite depressed as the surgery seemed to debilitate her, Kitchings wrote in her report, which went on to say, approximately 2 weeks ago, she mentioned she, quote, felt no hope of getting better. That's a Scientology phrase right there. 2 days ago, her daughter found the decedent covered with blood from her chest to waist. She asked what happened and was told, I had a nosebleed. She also came into the decedent's room unannounced and found the decedent writing something on a piece of paper. She quickly hid the paper, and when the daughter asked what it was, she said, it's just a letter to my doctor. My friends, it's important about the fact of her being on OT7, and I'm going to show you a document called R245, where we're going to go into a little more detail about what's happening here. I personally wanted to commit suicide, and I would suggest that the OT levels have suicide programming in them, because when I was getting out, I know this sounds a little out there, but when we get to season 3, I'm going to tell you all about the deprogramming process, and this is something I had to deal with. I think it's more than just leading you to want to suicide yourself or, damn it, the auditing didn't work that well. I think that Hubbard designed it this way so that when you do wake up or you start to question, you want to kill yourself. And it's very possible that the auditor and the auditing that she received was suggesting that she do that. 2 days ago, her daughter found the decedent covered with blood from her chest to waist. She asked what happened and was told I had a nosebleed. She also came into the decedent's room unannounced and found the decedent writing something on a piece of paper. She quickly hid the paper, and when the daughter asked what it was, it's just a letter to my doctor, she responded. The daughter's observations, the suicide notes, the previous apparent suicide attempt by slicing the wrist, all of it did suggest that Barnett was depressed about her physical condition and may have wanted to kill herself. That does seem to be true, my friends, and you're going to see how convenient, shall we say, that would be to David Miscavige and what was happening at the time as we go deeper into this today. But again, I asked Havencroft, how does a 5'3", 114-pound, 52-year-old woman with physical issues manage to shoot herself 3 times with a long gun into and through her chest and still have the ability to finish herself off with a shot to the head? Yes, they were through and through. That refers to the gunshot wounds. But I think one was through the breast. And if I remember, there were implants. Yes, she did have breast implants. So how does that become a critical injury, he asked. Indeed, the autopsy report does describe the shots as somewhat superficial. Quote, the course of the 3 projectiles is through skin and soft tissue. 1 projectile does pass through the breast implant. The report reads, but 1 bullet passed through Barnett's left lung and fractured ribs. If it was a suicide, that injury was apparently not something that could keep Barnett from continuing to fire at herself. I thanked Tavencroft for being helpful, and there was no doubt in my mind that he had reached a firm conclusion. He asked me to contact the sheriff's office directly if I had any further questions. We're almost done here, guys. Then we'll be moving on to the next part. It's hard to read all this shit without taking a sip of water. Over the years, David Miscavige's detractors have raised the strange details of his mother-in-law's death to suggest that he or the church may have had some reason to want her dead. Again, you'll be seeing all about this towards the end of the broadcast. In a 1994 affidavit in a court case growing out of the massive legal morass following the Time magazine's 1991 cover story, Scientology, the Cult of Greed, former high-ranking church executive Vicky Asnaran testified that Barnett had become part of an embarrassing splinter group that had rejected Miscavige's leadership. This is the same kind of thing that Hubbard faced all the time. People would always splinter off in many and various ways. Everyone, that's where you get such things as the Process Church and a million other offshoots, because people were always taking, they didn't like the management. They didn't like Hubbard. So they would often go off and form their own group where they could practice the tech without all the Orwellian shit that Hubbard was dumping onto them. Flo Barnett's membership in this group, Flo Barnett's membership in this squirrel group made her a suppressive person, as she was actively, quote, squirreling and a member of a suppressive group. And I don't think I have to tell you guys, Scientology watchers, that's a big deal. You definitely cannot do this. This would upset the crap out of Hubbard and or David Miscavige. Asnaran testified, referring to Scientology's word for heretic, squirrel. Squirrels are such nice creatures. I don't know why he would use that. The fact that David Miscavige was linked to her by familiar ties was extremely repugnant to him and to his wife, Michelle Miscavige. Asnaran testified that she witnessed Miscavige comment on Barnett's death, quote, that bitch got what she deserved. Remember that quote. Another former church executive, Robert Von Young, spelled out in his own court declaration the irregularities in Barnett's death and what investigators might have not considered. Quote, what the authorities didn't know was that she had left Scientology and was associating with apostates, to the anger, massive anger, of her son-in-law, Miscavige. In his own affidavit in the case, however, Miscavige denied that he had anything to do with Barnett's death. And we'll give him the last word. This is Miscavige speaking as he's punching someone right next to him. Not only is there no evidence to support this claim by Young, but there is clear evidence to the contrary. With the reports of the coroner and the medical examiner's investigator, who we got to, and with the deposition of the medical examiner, who we also threatened, what is that word? Is that unanimous? All the unanimous, unequivocal conclusion that Miss Barnett died from self-inflicted gunshots. Young has the temerity to suggest that I should be investigated to determine what he calls my role in that tragic suicide. With complete disdain for the facts and no regard whatsoever for any sense of decency, Young has taken a personal tragedy in my family's life. Oh, you mean the one you called a bitch? The suicide of my mother-in-law, and attempted to make this an issue in this lawsuit by twisting it to imply non-existent wrongdoing on my part. I not only had nothing to do with this tragic incident, but Von Young's gratuitous embellishment that I ordered the matter hushed up is equally false. Again, we actually have evidence from Jesse Prince's book suggesting that the opposite is true. If Kitching's warnings of that flimsy investigations by Los Angeles Homicides Bureau gave me pause, Havencroft's certainty about his conclusion seemed to carry significant weight. And this is Tony reminiscing. But I have to admit, I'm still left wondering about that small woman offing herself through such a superhuman effort. Okay, so there you go. That's Tony's write-up in 2012 in the Village Voice to set the groundwork for what the hell we're actually talking about. I guess I should probably check in the chat here real quick, see what's going on with you guys. Sorry that I can't engage too much with that today, but I'm just going to keep plowing through this shit. Kelly, I in my humble opinion, there's no way. No kidding, right? Kelly, I did get your message, my friend. I just been tied up. I will definitely get back to you. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, she just did an interview, which Mitch Brisker, definitely check that out. And Mitch also has been kind enough to try to help me fix the lighting and shit like that. And hopefully we can get him on here. So let's move on to the next part. Let me take off this stupid knowledge report thing at the bottom. Okay, throw that up here. Okay, so we got Tony out of the way. Now I want to show you a clip that I referred to earlier about, like I said, everything's kind of been memory hold off the internet, where the only thing that I could find discussing this recently is with Claire Headley interviewing Hana Whitfield, a lovely lady, and we're going to read a little clip from this, or we're going to listen to a little clip from this.
Interesting. Okay, so you were telling me about your...
I have her on 1.5, but let me put it on normal.
For this first, and was this the first time you had personally talked with Flo?
Yeah, I didn't know her before.
Okay.
She came across to me as very anxious, very frightened, very scared of what was happening with her. And the little bits she gave me in the phone call told me that she had experienced something very good early on in Scientology.
Okay.
And she had no one had ever been able to tell her what that was. And she had received a lot of help around it and wanted to have it acknowledged that she had received some sort of state of awareness that she wanted to have acknowledged. It was almost like somebody, let's say in the real world, a swimmer who swims in a competition and comes out as having broken the world record. They stand up and they're acknowledged and they're acclaimed for their ability, and they're happy with that. But in Scientology, there were all sorts of states Hubbard mentioned one could attain. And you could state what it was and be acknowledged for it and even receive a certificate for it. But in Flo's case, she said nobody would acknowledge what she said she had achieved. Nobody would do anything. I said, well, Claire, I'm sorry, Flo.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I can't promise you that I will be able to give you what you want, but we can certainly try. Let's try.
Okay. And what was the fear that she was talking about?
She felt that she was going crazy.
Okay.
She felt she was drowning. This would be psychologically, mentally, maybe emotion. There had to be emotions. She didn't mention emotionally, but there were emotions flooding through what she was saying.
Okay.
That the spirits of people who had died long ago she was still involved in them, and they were overwhelming her. She couldn't get rid of them, and she had at one point, and they were coming back after her, and she couldn't get rid of them, and she needed help desperately. She's
talking about auditing on OT7, which Hannah's very accurate. I can almost feel what Flo was freaking feeling, because it drives you insane. If you believe that there's imaginary beings all over your body and you're setting them free and saving them, I can tell you from personal experience, and I think I talked about it on Aaron's show, that it drives you crazy, and suicide does seem like a good option and a way out. And yeah, as somebody said earlier in the comments, suicide is immediate grounds for dismissal in Scientology. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Panicked.
Oh boy.
That was sort of the gist of it.
Okay. And do you know how far how far she'd gotten in terms of the Scientology levels?
Yes, she'd gone to what was the top at the time, which was OT7.
Wow. Okay.
She'd gone all the way through, and I was blown away that she had gone through apparently well enough for her to be happy with her completion at each level.
Yeah.
And yet at the end, she was so distraught. I scheduled her for one session, and she phoned and couldn't attend. And then
Hana is scheduling her. I don't believe that she's the actual auditor. Jesse Prince did audit Shelly, not Flo Barnett to my knowledge, but Shelly Miscavige. Just wanted to clarify that. And this is what Hannah's talking about trying to get help to Flo, who was in a desperate situation.
She phoned again before the second session and she said, Hannah, I'm desperate. I have to have some help. I said, Flo, can you come in today? She said, no, I can't. I've got no transport. I'm waiting for my car to get back. Somebody's got my car. And she was crying. She was just crying. And I thought, maybe I can get to her. But I don't remember what was going on. I couldn't get to her.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear from her again. Jerry and I talked about it. I even talked to to Judy Theory, who I used to consult with. She was a Class 12 auditor. She was living up the coast from me in Santa Barbara, and I used to consult with her. She was one of the few Class 12s who I knew where she was, and we had a good connection, and I would often talk to her about this person's auditing or that. Could I improve this? Could I do something better here? She was wonderful. And I even talked to Judy Theory. We got together over it, and she agreed with how I was going to approach Flo, with what we were going to do together.
Mm-hmm.
But then came that last phone call from Flo, and she was panicked, and I could not think of a way to get her. And then a day or two later, we heard, I don't remember how I heard.
Yeah, and sorry, we have to be careful what words we use on this platform.
Notice where she stopped her. I'm not accusing Claire of anything, but it's just very interesting how this is always diverted off of. And I'm going to show you where Aaron kind of did the same shit, man, when I was interviewing him.
Okay.
Just making sure you know that because I know what's coming, but go ahead.
Yeah, we heard that she had passed, and that somebody, I think one of her daughters or a friend had found her.
Oh dear.
And I was given all the details of it, and I was terribly distraught.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then you know, other people were calling and phoning, and we were sharing information, and then came the news. It got somehow into the
news. Like I said, I'm going to link this in the description box so you can see it, but there's no real new data. And not that Hannah would necessarily know that, you know, she wasn't auditing or anything, but I just thought that was interesting how Claire just bashed her off the subject there. I don't think that these people are unknowledgeable about this is all I'm suggesting. And then I'm going to hypothesize why I think that is. And I'd like to hear from you guys as well on this. So I want to show you something on R245, just to put the suicide stuff in a framework in which it's kind of looked upon in Scientology. Maybe this will give you some, as they say in Scientology, cognitions about certain things. So this is, I believe, is in the creation of human ability. I remember coming across this, and as Scientologists, we think, ha, 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 Ron's just being funny. He's so silly. But, you know, that's also a way to code things, and it's a little more than innuendo, as you're going to see here at the bottom. So R245 is the, let me make sure this is up here, guys. Like I said, brand new software. Please bear with me if I fuck this up the first time. So let me get rid of that. Okay. R245, and this is not to be confused with the telecommunications standard RJ, that's Ron's Journal 45. R245 is the name given by L. Ron Hubbard to what he described as, quote, an enormously effective process for exteriorization, but its use is frowned upon by this society at this time. In Scientology doctrine, exteriorization refers to the separation of the thetan, that's the soul, from the body, a phenomenon which Hubbard asserts can be achieved through Scientology auditing. That's the goal, my friends. You try to go up the OT levels. You become a thetan exterior. That means a soul who's outside of his body. And from that perspective and perception, you can make sense of your life in the world in a totally new way. R245 is said to be a process by which exteriorization can be produced by shooting a person in the head with a .45 pistol. This literal meaning is acknowledged by the Church of Scientology, although they deny that it is meant seriously. And here's the origins. Again, link in the description box, friends, a couple hours after the video for all of these references, but it did come out of the creation of human ability. And Ron would put on various shows and stuff to kind of introduce this process. Oh, that comical Ron, right? He was always just joking and degrading. When he got through talking about R244, this is in reference to Ron at one of his little lectures. He came out wearing a full Western garb like you might see in a John Wayne movie and a 6-shooter strapped to his side. Then he said something to the effect of, and now we have R245. And he pulled out this gun and blam. It was loaded with blanks, of course, but it woke everyone up. And another incident described here by Nibs, his son, who was the most effective, outspoken person about his father. There was one incident where he actually used real bullets and put a hole into the ground. He said something to the effect of, it's a very effective process for exteriorization, but frowned upon at this time by society. And that was all. And he didn't say another word about it, but it brought down the house. And then I wanted to show you this part. R245 in practice. Some critics of Scientology and ex-Scientologists have alleged that R245 was invoked by Hubbard to authorize the killing of individuals regarded as antagonistic to the Church of Scientology. That's a key point in reference to this particular case, which you're going to hear about when we get to the Jesse Prince material. There is no evidence that has ever been put into practice. There's plenty of evidence, I would suggest, that this has been put into practice. It's just hard to find that out because they offer through many layers of buffering. Obviously, Miscavige or Rathbun isn't going to go out and kill someone, but you'll see how they use levels of buffering to possibly do these kind of things, to carry them out if need be. There is no evidence that it has ever been put into practice, and Hubbard did not explicitly define the meaning of R245 in writing. Representatives of the Church of Scientology have said that Hubbard's description of R245, quote, was coined as a joke. It is not authorized, and I'm afraid it occasionally misfires as a joke when taken literally. Ha ha ha. Such a cute little quip there. On 2 separate occasions, orders to use R245 on specific individuals were published in a prominent Scientology magazine. On March 6, 1968, Hubbard issued an internal memo titled Racket Exposed, in which he denounced 12 people as, quote, enemies of mankind, the planet, and all life, and ordered that, quote, any Sea Org member contacting any of them is to use auditing process R245. In other words, murder. The memo was subsequently reproduced with another name added in the Church of Scientology's internal journal, The Auditor. These are magazines that we get as Scientologists and sent to our freaking house and all this bullshit. Another 4 people were named in a second R245 order published in The Auditor later in 1968. Stephen A. Kent of the University of Alberta characterizes such orders as demonstrations of, quote, the manifestation of Hubbard's malignant narcissism, and more specifically, his narcissistic rage. Again, I've talked with that psychopath multiple times, and he said that, and other sources say that a psychopath is inclined to possibly murder more than a narcissist. But if you hit narcissistic rage, it is within the realm of a narcissist, i.e. a conscienceless person, an empathy-deleted person, to so hit their breaking point that murder does become an option. The Santa Rosa News Herald reported in 1982 that, quote, attorneys have uncovered evidence to suggest that between 1975 and 1977, during the FBI's investigation of the cult, meetings of Scientology executives, which you're going to hear about again as we go on, were held in which there were discussions relative to, quote, auditing high-level FBI members with auditing process R245. Okay, so that's a little background on that. The next thing we're going to jump to is a little discussion I had with Aaron Smith-Levin about the murder thing. I already know that it's off limits kind of with him. And like I said, the 12 or so people at Int Base that we see over and over and over again. So I didn't press him on it, but it was interesting to hear his response. So here we go. Let me add this one. Stand by, please. If you're just joining us, we're discussing Flo Barnett, the mysterious death. It seems to me it's an obvious murder that was characterized as a suicide. She had 3 gunshot wounds to the chest and 1 gunshot wound, which was the fatal blow to the head. And we're discussing Marty Rathbun's involvement with that, as well as David Miscavige. So here we go when this comes up with Aaron. This is probably about 8 or 9 months ago or something.
Aaron, what the heck do you think it's going to take to actually, remove Scientology's tax-exempt status as the main goal to kind of get them, to stop doing so many criminal activities? What's the whole, 7-decade history, the bodies are buried left and right. They've done every known human criminal / mafia action known to man. What's it going to take to actually hold them to account?
So I think it will take, I think the first step will be getting them prosecuted for financial crimes. And I should probably go on the record saying, like, I think we colloquially say bodies are buried, but I definitely.
Yeah, regards that last comment, this definitely won't be for everybody's channel, you know. But if you check out the channel, it's not about that. It's just about trying to go beyond the controlled opposition.
I don't think Scientology is behind any murders.
None at all? Yeah, I do. Well, I would just put Lisa McPherson in that. That's not an outright what you call murder, but that's my definition.
Okay.
Maybe negligent murder.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, I do. I don't know if I could. I doubt I'd be able to. Maybe I could prove it. Maybe we'll be
How are
doing.
we not responsible for deaths?
Can I just say something real quick? Yeah, it's totally cool, guys. You don't have to. It's fine. Say whatever you like. But yeah, if you're new or if you make comments like that, I'm not going to block you or anything. But it is a little insensitive because I've been through hell and back just in the last 3 weeks broaching this topic. So I would say get informed a little bit. Or like I said, if it's not your cup of tea, just go hang out with the other people, man.
I just mean actual murder.
Yeah. That's a question mark. My jury's out on that. I think it's definitely not beyond them. But as you mentioned, I think in one of your videos, and you're right about it, they don't go for murder. They want Elron.
So I tried to ask Aaron a little bit about it. I already know it's a no-go area. So, I want to keep the ARC high when we were talking. Anyway, so another thing is, this isn't a personal attack, by the way. I'm just hypothesizing and wondering why this is such a no-go area, and it keeps coming up multiple times whenever the subject is broached. So let me pull up this here. We're going to be covering a lot of these mysterious deaths because, like I said, a lot of these stories have been memory hold. These people have been forgotten about, and there's grieving mothers and fathers out there that never get any justice. And when they're brought up, they are kind of pushed to the side. So I want to keep that dialogue alive, and bring up some more of these in these knowledge report videos. So another one that we may touch on in the future, it's a whole nother story unto itself. But Victoria Britton lost her son, Kyle Brennan, in another, shall we say, very mysterious circumstances. There's no way in hell that that was a suicide. There was 14 pieces of evidence that wiped away fingerprints and blood. And if you go to Victoria Britton's blog to learn more about the incredibly covered up death of her son, Kyle Brennan, which there'll be a link in the description box. She's a very brave lady who spent a lot of time breaking it down in multiple articles. And I would highly, highly suggest that you go there to get more information on that. And again, we have Aaron Smith-Levin here. Despite all evidence, Aaron Smith-Levin calls death of Kyle Brennan a suicide. Either he hasn't looked into it, it's a subject he doesn't want to go into, or there's a reason why they don't talk about it. And again, I'll link this in the description box as well, and you can see more about all the circumstances surrounding that. So now we can get into the meat of it here. Jesse Prince wrote a book that's called The Expert Witness, My Life at the Top of Scientology. And this one actually goes into probably the most details about the shenanigans and the mysterious crap of all the books that are out there about the management and what was going on at this time. Highly recommend it. Again, link in the description box. Nobody's paying me. Jesse doesn't know me. I just want to promote information that's I think is worth promoting. A memoir of a life that became involved in a secret society masquerading as a religion in Hollywood that practices magic and domination. That, in my opinion, is a perfect sentence to describe Scientology. This body of work could have been about you if you were contacted or chosen like I was. Buckle up and get ready to be changed in your thinking forever. Now we come to this. This is from Jesse Prince's book. And there's 2 excerpts I'm going to read to you, probably take about 5 minutes to get through, that will put hopefully everything that we've talked about thus far into better context. So let me pull this up. From Jesse Prince's book, Expert Witness, the chapter called The War Begins, 1984. That's very properly named because Scientology often described is like being in Orwell's 1984. There was another insurrection happening that directly exposed the activities of David Miscavige, L. Ron Hubbard, and Author Services, Inc. This insurrection was being spearheaded by none other than Joe Ziegel, the stepfather of Mark Yeager, commanding officer of L. Ron's International Messenger Organization. The messengers were the people that would take Hubbard's and or Miscavige's commands, take on the beingness of them and the way that they say it, go where they need to go to deliver that message. They're kind of like method actors. They take on the whole tone that Miscavige would say it, the beingness, and they're literally messengers. Joe Siegel had commiserated with ex-staff members that were part of the large group of Scientology executives who were excommunicated and kicked out of the church. At least 4 people from that group had been personal aides of L. Ron and did everything for him, including feeding him, bathing him, and caring for him during times when he was sick. Some of these people had cared for L. Ron for many years and knew many things about him the general public did not know. Joe Ziegel zeroed in on these people and debriefed them thoroughly about L. Ron Hubbard and his personal business. In other words, this is the last person that Miscavige wants out there, and he doesn't want another group, which came later in the form of Marty Rathbun and Mike Rinder, of a squirrel group that seems like they could challenge the power of Scientology itself. Joe Ziegel started a taped lecture series exposing intimate details he had learned about L. Ron, his wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, and the takeover of the Guardian's office by David Miscavige. That's another story for another time, which is fascinating. He also divulged detailed information that exposed exactly how the Religious Technology Center was incorporated and why. Got to take a drink of water. These taped lectures also include the details of how Author Services was incorporated, who it was staffed by, and the exact amount of money they were extracting from Scientology organizations for L. Ron's bank accounts on a weekly basis. The amount was in excess of $1 million per week. Quote, I had failed to handle Joe Ziegel, and David Miscavige told me not to worry about it because John Ziegel would now receive a, quote, special handling. This is where we get to Special Project L. David had a special staff member as part of his entourage that did nothing but handle lawsuits and intelligence activities in this exact same manner as the previous Guardian's office under Mary Sue Hubbard. Vicky and I were rank amateurs compared to the work these people were capable of. This is Jesse Prince talking. That person was known as Special Project L. You guys might notice that we have the L rundowns and stuff like that. There is a significance when we get to the signs and symbols of Scientology. That other person will go, oh, these are just the anti-vax conspiracy nutters. Well, if you don't know the occult, then you don't have a chance of understanding Scientology. And these symbols like L do actually mean something, but that's another subject for another time. That person was known as Special Project L, and his name was Marty Rathbun, but everyone called him Marty. Now, you guys know all about Marty. That's a separate video for a separate time. But you're also going to see why... let's just say that David might have a lot of blackmail material over him. When things got real bad and real ugly with our legal and intelligence endeavors, Special Project L wouldn't get involved. Marty was the interface with our hired guns like ex-police officers, ex-agents of various agencies and such. Now you guys are getting an idea of how they actually work and how perhaps they could change autopsy reports like in Lisa McPherson, etc. Over the years, Marty has developed a very good working relationship with certain individuals in Los Angeles and Riverside County police departments. He primarily worked with people that had previously been employed in law enforcement. The primary value these hired guns had were their current connections with those still hired in the system. Again, this is an example of safe pointing. Marty was like a secret weapon that functioned as a terminator at the behest of David Miscavige exclusively. Any and everything associated with John Ziegel was turned over to Marty to take care of. They picked the perfect terminal because I don't know if you guys saw my Scientology movie and stuff like that. He's very aggressive, obviously a narcissist, and it's all about Marty, and he does seem like he could get shit done in this area. I was never asked to deal with Joe Ziegel again, said Jesse Prince. We learned through our carefully placed spies within Mayo's group, that's David Mayo, who's running the Squirrel Group, and he was a big-time challenge to Hubbard and Miscavige because he, that's a whole story behind Mayo, but let's just say he was very well liked, amongst the indie Scientologists. We learned through our carefully placed spies within Mayo's group that David Mayo did, in fact, possess a copy of the stolen confidential material. We learned that John Nelson was also involved with the distribution of our stolen confidential materials as well. I believe they're talking about the confidential OT levels, which trying to steal those. Artie Lerma put them online back in the day. To do that is basically to take your life into your own hands, because that's the last thing Scientology ever wanted to get out there. Now it's freely accessible, and you can see them in videos galore. As if to add insult to injury, David Miscavige's mother-in-law, Flo Barnett, had resigned from Scientology. Again, Hana talks about this too in that video. So please check that out if you want to know more detail. We learned from Bob Minton that Flo also possessed a copy of our confidential upper-level materials. Quote, now David Miscavige also had a proven connection to an external influence hostile to Scientology, just like Mike Yeager. Technically, he was a potential trouble source, or PTS. Again, this is a big deal in Scientology. You can't be connected to any psychiatrist, anybody that says anything negative to the church. I deleted all sorts of people in my life on the most smallest of fractions. Like if they said, hey, I heard you're in Scientology, that was if they questioned it at all, that was enough for me to get them out of my life, because you can't be PTS or connected to anybody, quote, negative. David was extremely upset over this situation. If L. Ron had known of this at the time, there would be no David Miscavige to talk about. So you can see, guys, how important it is for David Miscavige to handle Flo and the rest of these squirrels. His career would have been over, because when L. Ron got to anyone or anything he thought was an external influence, he wouldn't stop until all connections to the external influence were removed and completely gotten rid of. Friends, it was all about Hubbard. He was the ultimate psychopath and malignant narcissist. And if you listen to the last interview with Bill Franks, even as close as Bill Franks was to Hubbard and considered him a very good friend, Hubbard had no problem setting this guy up, Bill, in the most ridiculous way. He had no loyalty to anybody but himself, money, and power. The situation posed a direct threat to David, and he went into action. He told Vicky, that's Vicky Asnaran, and me not to get involved with the situation with his mother-in-law, Flo Barnett. He said she would be handled by Special Project L. Here's the next excerpt. From the chapter 1984. Let me make sure everything's good. Okay. This is also from the chapter 1984 and former Int Base escapee Jesse Prince's book, Expert Witness. Shortly after this incident occurred, I spent more time at the Gold Base. One day, someone, I don't recall who, brought me to the auditing file of Shelly Miscavige, David Miscavige's wife, and told me she needed a counseling session. When I examined the content of her file, I saw that there was a report written which stated that Shelly's mother had recently committed suicide. The report stated that Shelly was quite distraught over the death of her mother, and she needed to go in for a counseling session immediately. This is Jesse speaking again. I prepared a place for counseling, and Shelly was brought to me. It was so sad to see her like that. She looked like she had been crying hard for a while. Her eyes were bloodshot red. She had a blank expression on her face, and she would sort of mumbled her words. Before I attempted to do any Scientology counseling on her, I decided to talk to her to try and understand what happened. Through her tears, Shelly told me her mother had committed suicide. She said her mother took a rifle and shot herself 3 times in the chest. As discussed earlier, my friend, she actually shot herself 4 times, but apparently Shelly did not say that here. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if she was sure that she shot herself 3 times in the chest. Shelly said that's what she was told. I point blank asked Shelly, how in the fuck can someone shoot themselves 3 times in the chest with a rifle? She just looked at me, then looked at the ground and replied, I don't know. There was nothing I could do or say to help her feel better, and we both knew it. I didn't force any Scientology processing on her, and she appreciated that. Good job, Jesse, because that's definitely the way you're supposed to kind of handle this situation. I just sat with her for a while, and I said nothing. After a while, she said she felt better and thanked me for sitting with her. She told me her stepfather was a black person who had been living with her mother. She said David Miscavige never did like the stepfather, but Shelly did. She told me the man had taken good care of her mom through the years. We both stood up, and I gave her a hug, and she really needed that. I let her cry until she stopped. Then we waited again. She had put on her game face before she left. When I left, this is Jesse Prince speaking, I went to David Miscavige's office to inform him of his wife's condition. After he had thanked me for taking care of Shelly, he said, that bitch got what she deserved, referring to Shelly's mother, Flo Barnett. I was speechless, and after an awkward silence, I left the room. There you have it, guys. Now, that's kind of enough information, I would suggest, to, at the very least, implicate Marty, David Miscavige, and other people. And you heard David's previous statement where he's like, I can't believe there would be any suggestion that I'd have anything to do with it. I would suggest that, you know, Marty and people like that, the dozen or so int-based people, again, we see everywhere, surely they would have had to do stuff, particularly Mike Rinder, who was the head of the Office of Special Affairs for 22 years. That would be handling the intelligence and dirty tricks office, among other things, all the way back to Lisa McPherson and before, up to the cover-up of the Danny Masterson rape allegations. So everybody kind of has stuff on them. I kind of look at it as a mafia situation. If a family, if one person goes forward, if they bring up these deaths, if one person goes and talks to the FBI, and I know Rinder says he has, but you know, you can't really get much out of him on that. If one person goes, everybody has blackmail on everybody else, and everybody would probably go to prison. Not everybody. It depends on what you did. But let's just say there might be a mutual reason to kind of keep that off limits and keep it about the tax exempt status. In other words, off of the things that we did in there and onto stuff that won't implicate us. I'm going to say something about that at the end too, and throw out a question for you guys, see what you think about that. So as we're kind of ending off here, that was the main information. And I just wanted to let you know, Flo Barnett's coroner report will also be in the description box, and I'd like to briefly go over it here, just some pertinent details. So the coroner's report on Flo Barnett would certainly make interesting reading. Does anyone on the net have this? And here it is. So she was shot 3 times. Actually, she was shot 4. The only suspect mentioned is her husband, which may explain a less than vigorous investigation if the shooting was considered a mercy killing. 2 suicide notes were found. The way I see a possibility here, guys, is David Miscavige definitely needs to handle her. She's a squirrel. She's part of this suppressive group. He wants to take over Scientology. This is and for many and other various reasons, she has to be, quote, handled. If she could be driven to suicide in her auditing, if she could suicide herself, or if she couldn't quite do it, if she was mercy killed or murdered to get her out of the picture, these are some of the things that I was thinking with when I was going over all this material, like what could be the possibilities. But I would suggest she certainly did not suicide herself. It's absolutely impossible from the police report. It doesn't make any sense. So the only suspect that mentioned is her husband, which may explain a less than vigorous investigation if the shooting was considered a mercy killing. 2 suicide notes were found. Bit of background, Flo Barnett was David Miscavige's mother-in-law. Shortly before her death, reportedly, she spoke of filing suit against the Church of Scientology. Oh, really? And naming Miscavige in it. Well, there you go. Holy shit. I would appreciate other background. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So this just goes over some basic information. Again, you guys can go over it in the description box and pull it up if you want to see the detail, but I'll just try to cover the pertinent information here before we end off. So just real quickly, the synopsis: the decedent is a 52-year-old female who suffered gunshot wounds, 3 to the left upper quadrant and 1 to the head, either as a result of a homicide or a suicide on September 8, 1985. And then it talks about where she was transferred to, etc. Got the investigation here about how it was handled. It looks like it was fairly thoroughly investigated, but you make up your own mind. Got evidence, property, identification, identification. What else we got here? Gunshot wound. It goes over the various gunshot wounds and how severe they are. Here's the external examination of her body. Gunshot wound of the head. Again, it goes into detail about each of the gunshots. The cardiovascular system, respiratory system. They cover the whole body. Very interesting. Interesting just how detailed this is. So conclusion, the case is that of a 52-year-old woman who died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds, which were self-inflicted. The gunshot wound of the head was immediately fatal and occurred following the 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, which had produced a very small left hemothorax. In addition, there were 2 recent incised wounds that involved the right and left wrists. 2 suicide notes were left, and the decedent had become depressed following surgical intervention for an aneurysm of the carotid artery. So this is the surgical problem that she was kind of dealing with, but it wasn't that big of a deal for her. She wasn't super suffering. That wouldn't have been a reason, because she was in so much pain, to suicide herself, but that she was suffering that. And then the hospital report, coroner's case, etc. I think there's something here at the. Okay, so there you go. And there's other Scientology related deaths. There's so many, guys. This is just sort of an opening one. So that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to cover. I wanted to ask you guys in the comments after this video publishes, what do you make of all this material? And also, many people email me. They give me links. They give me information. They throw them in the comments. I really appreciate that. So it would be nice to people that know this a lot more than I do or have information to share. Please do so in the comments. You can email me. And we're just getting started on this whole knowledge report series. There's so much more to come. This is kind of a test run. So we have Marisa Sigmund coming on tomorrow to do an interview at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And that will be very interesting. She has an incredible story to share. And I guess I'll just leave it off there. And we'll leave as always from the absolute jackass that started all this. And we'll see you tomorrow, my friends. Take care.
And you find in each and every case, you're finding the phenomenon of entities, communications, spaceships, other planets, locations, beingness in other states, and all of this, and you find this to be a consistent condition. You have fulfilled this definition of the mesh universe.